Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Along the Way podcast. My name is Lydia Kyle and I'm so glad you're here. If you're just stumbling across the podcast for the first time, welcome. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit the subscribe button. Let me know in the comment section that you're a new listener and I can't wait to get to know you through these episodes. Today we're going to be talking about homeschool and I'm not going to lie, I won't pull any punches today. There may be some things that I say that are triggering. There may be some things that I say that might be considered as offensive, but I'm going to tell you my perspective on why homeschool is probably one of the best options and is going to continue being a great option as our country, the United States of America, goes through potentially some tumultuous years and some tumultuous generations when it comes to parenting styles and the education system that we have subsequently created. But before we get into that, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for this season, which is Jackson and Hyde. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I have one of Jackson and Hyde's tote bags here. I have had this tote bag for nearly 4 years. It is my favorite bag, and every time I take it somewhere, someone asks me where I got it because all of Jackson and Hyde's unique cowhide products, they are conversation starters. Everything they make is quality, and they are an amazing small business to support. Plus, you can get 20% off your order if you follow the link in the description of this episode and use the code along the way. So whether you're looking for something for someone who is impossible to buy for, or you just want to treat yourself to some high quality leather goods that are one of a kind, every single product has its own unique flair. Be sure to use that code and check out Jackson and Hyde. But without any further ado, let's get into today's episode. So essentially today's topic is the argument for homeschool. Why homeschool is potentially one of the most viable options for educating children in a way that is not only comprehensive but holistic when it comes to their emotional, social, psychological, mental well-being. Homeschool, in a lot of ways, is sometimes the only option, it feels like. And maybe not everybody feels like that. I refer to myself all the time as a reluctant homeschooler. If you're not new to the podcast and you've listened to some of my episodes about homeschool from season 2 and season 3, I refer to myself as a reluctant homeschooler all the time. And the reason I do that is because I didn't want to homeschool. I did not want to homeschool. I was adamant that I would never homeschool my 3 children. It was not what I wanted. I felt incapable. I felt like it would be torture. And I felt like I was not prepared for something like that. And I knew a lot of families that were successfully homeschooling. That's the thing. Like, I didn't have a negative view of homeschooling for other people. I just didn't want to homeschool for myself. I looked at that and thought, I don't have time. I don't have patience. I don't have capacity. Like, there's no way that I could educate my 3 children. And then out of necessity, I seriously had to consider it because I had a child. And again, I have multiple podcasts where I go into detail about this, but I had one child in particular that was just being failed by the education system and not even the public education system. They were enrolled in a private Christian school and he was being left behind in the sense that he's a good boy. He was well behaved. Teachers loved him. Staff loved him. And yet he couldn't tell you his alphabet. And when I enrolled him in that private school that costs a second mortgage to pay for, he knew his alphabet. And that yet after months of being in that private school, he'd suddenly forgotten those things. And he came home from school every single day overwhelmed, angry, exhausted, full of pent-up energy and aggression. And it was like, oh my gosh, this isn't my kid. Whose kid is this? Because we must have had a body snatching incident because this is not the little boy that I dropped off here this morning. So faced with that, I had to seriously consider homeschool. And I did. And looking at it through that lens, I no longer had that reluctant homeschooler feeling. It was just like, this is what has to be done. This is what has to be done. And it's really interesting because I was listening more recently. So like we've been doing this for over a year now. I feel like we're muddling our way through it fairly confidently. There are days that my children hate school. There are days that my children do great at school. That's just how it goes with education. Like, I think the hardest thing about homeschool, not to like go off on a rabbit trail here, but I think one of the hardest things about homeschool is that you can't take it personally, even though you have to take it personally because they're your kids. Like, you have to take it personally, but at the same time, your kid's not going to like school. But even if your kid was going to school, they would be complaining about waking up and going to school. They would be complaining about doing the homework, right? That's a lot of times, not all kids, but a lot of times that's a default. I don't want to do it. I don't like it. This isn't for me. Okay, they'd be doing that if they were going to public school. They're doing it if they're doing homeschool. You just have a tendency to take it a little bit more personally when you're the teacher and not someone else is the teacher. So I struggle with that sometimes. But the fact of the matter is that my children are excelling. Emotionally, physically, and mentally, my children are going above and beyond what could ever be expected of them or would be a result of them attending public school. And I say that confidently as someone who taught in a public school setting. I taught special education. When I graduated from Texas Christian University, I joined Teach for America. I have a whole episode about that as well. I have a whole episode about why Teach for America is a total scam, and it is part of the thing that is wrong with the United States education system. But I digress. Go listen to that episode if you want to know what I'm talking about there, because I just lay it all out there. That's in season 3. But I had that experience, and it was not my first teaching experience, okay? I didn't go in totally blind. And it was such a negative experience that it immediately left a bad taste in my mouth for all education, even homeschool. That's part of the reason why I thought I couldn't homeschool my own kids, was because of the negative experience that I had had in the public education system. I digress. It was interesting. I listened to a podcast, ironically, with Joe Rogan and Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe is the dirty jobs guy, you know? He's a character, for sure. But I really enjoy listening to him. I really enjoy listening to podcasts that he does. And I will link the podcast to the Joe Rogan Experience where Mike Rowe is the guest. I will link it in the description of this episode, both on YouTube and on audio versions. I was listening to that podcast, and Mike Rowe essentially said, anytime you pass off obligation to someone else, it will come back and bite you. It will come back and bite you. And I'm gonna pull it up because I wrote it down. I actually pulled over the car and I wrote down what he said, because to me it summed up homeschooling entirely. And it really, really stuck with me. He said along these lines, this is not a direct quote, and like I said, I'll tag the episode. Complacency is assuming that someone else cares about your safety or your life more than you. And abdication of responsibility will result in chaos somewhere else in your life. That's what it boiled down to. And that's not, like I said, that's not a direct quote. He said it better than me. He said it more cohesively than me. But as I was listening to him saying it, I said, that's why I homeschool. That's why I homeschool, because it felt like sending my children into someone else's classroom where other people's, and we're going to get into this too. Like I said, this one will probably get me canceled. It's not the first time that I've said controversial stuff, and it's not the first time that I've hurt feelings, but I'm willing to say it. Sending my child into a classroom where the teacher is having to deal with everyone else's kids' behavioral problems, and my child sometimes behavioral problems, where they don't have the capacity to deal with 15 kindergartners who are out of control. That's complacency on my part, because I am capable of homeschooling my kids. Not everyone is. That is the caveat that I will say. Until we become a society once again, and I really hope that someday we will, until we become a society again where a family can live on a single income, it sounds like a pipe dream even when I say it out loud. And our family doesn't survive on a single income. I make my money from home. And sometimes I'm run ragged trying to do all of the things that have to be done to not only maintain the fact that I'm bringing in an income and I have the time and capacity to homeschool these children. It's not easy. It is a sacrifice. It is 100% a sacrifice. Not everybody can homeschool. And if you're listening to this and you're in a position where you're like, I can't quit my job. My kids go to public school. I can't quit my job. You have to do the best that you can. And you cannot be complacent. Because what you have to understand is that the classroom is not the same place that it used to be. And to me, when I listened to Mike Rowe say that, I realized that because I had the choice, I could homeschool my children by allowing them to go into a classroom and be failed by the system, right? Despite the fact that I was paying over, a second mortgage. That's what I compare it to, a second mortgage to have my 3 children be in this private Christian school. They were being failed. Specifically, one child was being failed. And it's not like the others were being served abundantly either. It was complacency on my part. And what he said was abdicating that responsibility. So assuming that someone else cares about my children more than me. This is how I equated it to homeschool. I apologize. I should slow down a little bit. I'm getting a little bit worked up. Assuming that someone else cares about my children more than me. Assuming that someone else cares more about the success of my child academically, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Cares more than me. That's a farce. There's no way. Even the best teachers do not have the capacity to care more than an emotionally intelligent, competent, and loving parent. Not all parents should homeschool. Listen, excuse my language, but there are some shitty parents out there. And shitty parents should not homeschool. Okay? But if you have at least a smidgen of emotional intelligence and you love your children and you feel that you want the best for your children, you're going to have incredibly frustrating days of homeschool and you're going to make some mistakes. But the bottom line is that most parents care more about their children than a teacher can care about their child, or at least they should. So assuming that a teacher who has 100 plus other children that they are responsible for at the higher levels, at the lower levels, hopefully less than that. But again, the education system is not what it used to be. Assuming that that teacher has the capacity to care for my one child as much as I do, that's a lie. There's no possible way. There's no possible way that that teacher can care more about my child than me. There's no possible way that that teacher can provide my child with everything that they need. Let's not even get into the fact that they're going to be there for 8 hours a day. They're going to spend the majority of their life in the hands of someone else. Complacency is assuming that someone else cares more than you do about the safety of your family. And abdicating the responsibility of raising and educating our children is going to cause chaos. And the chaos, we're already seeing it because the education system is absolutely out of control. Absolutely, the education system is not what it used to be. Not only is it not what it used to be, it's borderline dangerous, not only for children, but for the teachers. It is not a healthy place to be sending your children. I know not all schools are like this. I know not all classrooms are like this, but listen, statistically speaking, it's not great. It's not great. You may get lucky, right? You may get lucky. You live in a tiny little town and the teachers are amazing and the community is amazing, wonderful, fantastic. But let's be honest. That's not the majority of America right now. Let me give you an example of this. Here's an example of what the classroom is currently like, what public education is currently like. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see I have my phone out. I am reading this directly. I'm going to be doing some reading today because not only do I have this, I have statistics for you in favor of homeschool. This is the argument for homeschool. And I never thought I would feel this passionate about this, but I struggle with this daily. Where it's like, oh my gosh, would my kids be better off sending them to public school? Would they have a better social life sending them to public school? And then I get things like this, and I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. All you have to do is log on to social media and look at videos of classrooms, or listen to teachers tell you what's going on. Even the best teachers are experiencing some really, really catastrophic things in their classrooms. Listen to this. This is from a veteran teacher. I will not name the teacher. They sent this. I asked a question. This was their response. The question was, can you tell me what classroom management is like right now, and what types of things are you seeing in the classroom that negatively reflect on the education system and our society currently? And this was their response. Against my will, I spend more time redirecting misbehavior than I do teaching content. I teach 12 to 13-year-olds, and I have been teaching for 10 years. So this is a veteran teacher, okay, in a middle school setting. The majority of this generation does not have a firm grasp on boundaries, such as respect for personal space and others' privacies, social expectations, such as listening to others, sharing, waiting your turn, or consequences for breaking rules that have been over-communicated at this point. More often than not, if a student is corrected for a misbehavior, even something as serious as pushing, hair pulling, roughly putting their hands on another student, I will administer consequences, and the transgressor will adamantly gaslight that they did nothing, rarely taking responsibility, even if I just watched them do it in front of me, plain as day, seconds before. Every day, I worry more and more that despite mine and others' teachers' constant coaching, this is what I meant, there's no way that a teacher can have the capacity to deal with this amount of BS from that many children. No way can one human being have that capacity. No human being should be raising hundreds of other people's children, period. Anyway, I digress. Back to the quote. Quote, every day I worry more and more that despite my and other teachers' constant coaching, these students will inevitably grow up to be entitled and toxic adults who lack empathy, accountability, and resilience. That sums it up. That sums it up. It's toxic. It is a toxic environment. It is not the teacher's fault. It is not, sure, some teachers create toxic environments. Some people shouldn't be teachers, just like some people shouldn't be parents. Okay? But the bottom line is it is a toxic environment. And I think part of the reason is that we have abdicated the responsibility of raising our children, educating our children, and preparing our children to teachers. Why? Why would I assume that it is a teacher's responsibility in a public school setting or a private school setting to do what I should be doing as a parent? And then essentially what we run into is a snowball effect, right? So when we were kids, not to be one of those people that says, like back in my day, not to go there, but go with me here. The majority of us, when we went to school, we already had an understanding of authority. We already had an understanding of right and wrong. We had an understanding of, the correct way to behave in a social setting. Okay? I think we'd improved a little bit better than our grandparents' generation where, children had a little bit of autonomy. It wasn't like a, children should be seen and not heard situation, but we still knew what authority was in most cases. The majority of children that were entering, say, a kindergarten classroom had not only a basic understanding of their own personal self, they had a basic understanding of how to act in a social setting. Teachers were not having to teach children how to act like decent human beings. Sure, you might have had some behaviors. You might have had one or two kids that came from a rough family life that you had to remedy some of that. You're always going to have disruptions. I remember when I was a kid, there were always certain characters in the classroom that were a disruption, but it wasn't the whole class. It wasn't the whole class. A veteran teacher who is teaching middle schoolers should not be spending the majority of their time redirecting misbehavior rather than teaching content. 12 and 13-year-olds should know how to act. And that's their parents' responsibility. But hear me out. Had the parents done their due diligence and not passed that responsibility off to preschool teachers, to kindergarten teachers, had they not passed off that responsibility, we probably wouldn't be in that situation. But here we are. So what now? What now? And as controversial as it may sound, I don't trust the education system to give my children what they need or deserve. Therefore, I'm going to take it into my own hands and do the best that I possibly can. And yes, there may be hard days. There may be days where I question, why am I doing this? There may be days where my kids go, oh my gosh, what is wrong with mom? But the bottom line is that they are safe, they are secure, they are learning, and they are loved. That's the bottom line. But furthering the argument for homeschool, what do the statistics say? What are the statistics telling us about homeschool? So I'm pulling out the phone again because, like I told you guys, this one was one that I sat down and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make sure I know what the heck I'm talking about. Because here's the thing, homeschool. I don't quite know why homeschool got a bad reputation, frankly, because every homeschool kid that I've ever met is doing fine. Like, I haven't met a single homeschool child, whether they liked homeschool or not. That's the interesting thing. Here's the interesting thing. Because children are resilient, okay? That's why even in the public education system, you will have children who succeed. Even in this generation where a veteran teacher expresses their concern about the ability of these children to grow up into fully functioning adults, let alone good American citizens, world citizens, even then, there will be children that grow up and turn into good human beings. Because not all children are inherently going to fail because of a system that is failing. Children are incredibly resilient. But the interesting thing is that when I think about homeschool and people, homeschool kids are weird or homeschool kids are unsocialized, whatever. I know several homeschool children who are adults now. I can't think of a single one of them that is not thriving or successful, even if they didn't like homeschool. I am thinking of one homeschool child, who was homeschooled. He didn't enjoy it. He didn't like it. It wasn't fun. It wasn't necessarily a good experience. But guess what? He is a fully functioning adult with a great job, a career, a wife, all the things, and a good relationship with his family. Families are chaotic, but you know what I mean. So like, he didn't even enjoy homeschooling and yet still turned out all right. I can't think of a single homeschool person who was homeschooled in our generation who didn't turn out all right. So why do we have that negative connotation to it? Honestly, I don't want to get conspiratorial, but I think there's something behind that. The negative response to homeschool, I believe, is part of a narrative that keeps parents from considering that option. I really feel like there's a narrative there. And maybe I should dig into that more. Maybe I don't really care because the narrative didn't work on me and it didn't work on millions of other parents who have chosen homeschool. But the bottom line is I think there's something there that we've been fed this line about homeschool kids being unsocialized, homeschool kids being weird, homeschool kids not thriving. But here's the deal. The statistics say otherwise. Even now, the statistics say otherwise. So, standardized test performance. Okay, so that's the benchmark that we use in public schools, right? Standardized testing. Where are they at? How are they doing? 78% of peer-reviewed studies on academic achievement show that homeschool students perform higher than their peers. Shocker. Shocker. If you put a homeschool kid in a standardized test, more likely than not, they are going to outperform their peers. Okay. Interesting. So then what happens? Okay. Not everybody chooses college, but college in a lot of times is a benchmark for people. You know, even if you don't choose college, you know, did you receive enough of an education that you could attend college if you wanted, right? Even if you're not going to. I personally, if we homeschool, which I don't see why we wouldn't, but things change, circumstances change. Listen, if 2 years from now you see me and I'm not homeschooling, just know that life is hard and circumstances change. We all do the best that we can. And that's another reason why I want you guys to understand that this is not the type of podcast that I want you to walk away feeling guilty about if you're not in a position to homeschool. That's not the point of this. The point of this is for us to understand our involvement with our children's lives is absolutely vital. And it is not good for us to abdicate the responsibility of raising our children. If you have to send your children to public school or you're choosing to send your children to private school and you are not in a position to educate your children at home, you better make dang sure that you're making up the difference in other places. Because children who are attending public schools, they're not doing good. The majority of them, they're not doing good. They're not doing good academically. They're not doing good emotionally, functionally. So we better be making up the difference in our homes or it's going to get real ugly in 15, 20 years. Arguably, it's already ugly. I digress. College. Oh, that was the point that I was making, was that, if we homeschool all the way through and the standardized testing required to attend college is still a thing. Even if my children don't want to attend college, I will ask them to take those tests. So here's this. Homeschool students are being widely recruited, not just accepted, recruited by universities. Homeschool kids are being sought out by universities to attend university, with them performing higher on average in both the ACT and the SAT. That's the point that I was making about having my kids take those standardized tests, even if they don't immediately want to go to college. But homeschool students are being recruited, widely recruited for universities, performing higher on average in the ACT and the SAT. Not only that, okay, not even academically speaking. You heard what a veteran teacher had to say about the classroom. So is it surprising that 87% of peer-reviewed studies on social, emotional, and psychological development show that homeschool students perform higher than their peers in conventional schools when it comes to social, emotional, and psychological skills? No, not shocking. Classrooms feel like a war zone, you guys. And I can tell you that from when I taught. I felt like I was in a war zone every day. Not only did I fear for my safety, I felt like I felt shell-shocked. When I dreaded walking into that building every day. And when I walked out of it, I felt like my soul had been shattered. And it wasn't all behavior, it was just darkness. I don't know how to describe it any other way. The children were being failed, even when the best teachers were giving their best effort and doing the absolute best that they could to provide a quality education. Everyone was being failed. Students were being failed. Teachers were being failed. Administration was being failed on a mass level. Failure. And it was dark. And that's not even getting into the behavioral things. There were times that I seriously feared for my safety. There were multiple times that I had to remove students from classrooms for their safety, to isolate another student. And this was just a resource classroom. I know I said I taught special education, but not special education in the sense that I was with students with severe differences and disabilities. No, I was with the students who needed a little bit of extra help. They had learning differences. They had an IEP, right? They needed to come see me once a day so that we could make sure they were actually getting their stuff done. They were getting some remedial attention, all right? These are children that had every capability of being a functioning member of society, the school ecosystem. And there were multiple times that I had to remove every other child from my classroom and try to isolate a child for their safety and for everyone else's safety. Multiple times. I cannot imagine what other teachers experience on a day-to-day basis. It's scary. It is scary. The public school system is not the place where our children should be going to become emotionally, spiritually, physically, and psychologically developed. It's not the place. And if your children are in public school, you better be doing your darndest to make sure that you're filling those gaps at home. But that's why I think that homeschool is going to become the best option for so many families, because families are going to start recognizing, or have already recognized, this system is failing my child and I'm not willing to allow that to happen. That was what brought me to this point. Was I looked at it and I said, you know what? My comfort is not worth my child being failed in this setting. I can be uncomfortable. I can figure this out. I can give my time. I can give my effort, because I'm not willing to abdicate the responsibility of raising my child and helping my child be emotionally, socially, psychologically, spiritually developed. I'm not abdicating that responsibility to someone else who's trying to do that with 25 other kids when I can do it myself. That's complacency. I was not willing to be complacent when it came to my children's education, let alone their development. And that's what led me here. I was a reluctant homeschooler. This was not what I planned. And yet here I am. And I can't say for sure if I'm doing an excellent job at it, but I think we're doing okay. And the bottom line is that I know my children are provided for better by me, their mother, than they could ever be provided for by a teacher who's burnt out, overwhelmed, and in some cases afraid of going into the classroom every single day. And that's the argument, in my opinion, for homeschool in this day and age. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Along the Way podcast, you guys. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Let me know if you're a new subscriber. And if you're going to share this on social media, I love to see what you guys are saying about the podcast. So tag me. You can find my contact information in the description of the episode. I'm typically pretty easy to find on social media. You can usually find me just by searching my name. But if you want the direct link, it's there. I'd love to hear what you guys are saying about the podcast. I want to know your thoughts. And if you have any thoughts about this homeschool episode, let me know what they are. Let's have a discussion, because again, I may have said some things that didn't resonate, and I'd love to know, because I love to have those conversations. As always, thank you to our sponsor, Jackson and Hyde. You guys go check out that link. Even if you just click and browse, support a small business, check out what they have to offer. You will not be disappointed with anything that you order from Jackson and Hyde. It's the perfect gift for yourself or for someone else. Just go check it out and be sure to use that code along the way, because you're going to get 20% off. Even the sale prices, you're going to get 20% off. So thank you to Jackson and Hyde for sponsoring not only this season, but this episode of the Along the Way podcast. And I will see you guys back next week for another episode. See ya.